I think I've met almost all of you, but I will meet, I'm sure I'm going to meet the few that I haven't met yet by lunchtime. So I'm not going to introduce myself other than to say my name is Shaazka Beyerle. You've got the bios in your booklets, so you can read about that there. And by the way, I live in Washington, D.C. That's the only thing I'll say. So I've heard that some people are going to be passing through Washington after FSI. So I'd really like to know who's passing by Washington. Because it would be great to see you while you're there. Okay, so the next hour and a half or thereabouts, we're going to talk about corruption. So I'd like to ask you a question, and you can just raise your hands. Who among you are trying to impact corruption in your work or in your voluntary civic activities? Wow, lots of people. Okay. Who among you are either directly or indirectly studying corruption or writing about corruption in your professional work? So, yeah, quite a few people. And who among you have found that even if you are not working directly or indirectly on corruption, that in the course of your work or in the course of your advocacy, you are hitting the wall of corruption? So basically, corruption is affecting us all in this room, either in our work or what we're trying to do directly or indirectly in our personal lives. And this is a reality around the world, no matter where we come from. So next question is, it's a hypothetical question, but I want to just get us thinking about this whole topic. Imagine a citizen living in a country that has come out of a violent conflict. And they're facing a lot of corruption. People are very marginalized. People are very poor. What can they do? One scenario. Imagine living in a country that is sort of coming out of an authoritarian system. And they are living with a legacy of decades of corruption that was part of the authoritarian system. And they're trying to build a new country with an accountable government. What can they do? What can citizens do? Imagine living in a country that has a relatively well-functioning democracy, but it's being corrupted by special interests, by money in politics, by corruption at the local level in municipalities. What can citizens do? So all these different scenarios are really about this session, because this session is not a hypothetical session. It's not about theory. It's about what people are doing around the world right now and what we can learn from them in tackling corruption, whether or not we want to, whether or not that's because that's our professional focus, or because we need to tackle corruption in order to do what we want to do. Like we may be fighting for health care, for treatments, for hospitals, for treatments for tuberculosis or HIV/AIDS. We may be fighting against poverty, but we're hitting corruption. We may be fighting, to preserve our environment, but we're hitting against corruption. We may be fighting to prevent citizens from getting thrown off their land, but we're finding that corruption is is enabling that. So in one way or another, we end up fighting it. So what I will do is try to spare you a lot of too much talking. I'm going to try really hard and try to focus on what people are doing. So I've got a whole bunch of video clips lined up to show you from different campaigns. So let's move down. So the first thing, though, that's really important is to define corruption. And the reason why I want to define corruption is because how we define a problem will affect how we think about impacting that problem. So I'll share all these PowerPoints with you through ICNC, but we have a traditional definition, the top one by Transparency International. But that's not enough if we want to think about fighting corruption. It's a very good description. If somebody said to you, give me a tweet about the definition of corruption, that's the only definition you could give that really encapsulates it. But there's more to corruption than that. Some of you have, in just chatting with some of you, You referred to corrupt systems, and you're absolutely right. Corruption occurs in systems. It's not just random. It's not that you have a corrupt person here with a victim or a willing corruptee here, and another corrupt relationship there, and another corrupt relationship there. It's the fact that this runs as a system. Different kinds of corruption run in systems. It can run within a government office. It can run within a ministry. It can run within a government. It can run across sectors, horizontally between elements of the private sector, parts of the government. It can involve organized crime. It can involve violent non-state actors and violent non-state groups. So corruption always functions in a system. So we need to have a definition that encapsulates that system. So I present to you the second definition, which is the Shaazka definition. I'm not going to read it out. But what's important to think about is that corrupt systems involve relationships of people. And these people are benefiting from the corruption. So they have the vested interests to perpetuate that system. That's why it's so hard to impact it. How can you impact it when you have all these people that are in this system benefiting? Naturally, they're not going to say, oh yeah, I'm going to give up all my benefits and be honest. They're going to want to do whatever they can to perpetuate that system. So from a civil resistance perspective, we can learn. We know about the concept of disruption. One of the strategies is to think about how do we disrupt that system of corruption. The third definition here is something very important because this involves why we fight corruption and how it affects people. So this is what I would call a bottom-up definition of corruption. Do any of you know who is Aruna Roy from India? Yeah? Okay, Kanika raised her hand first. Who is she? Do you want to tell everyone?
Yeah, so Aruna founded Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan, which is an organization that works in rural Rajasthan as well as other part of India.
Speak up, please.
Yes. Yeah, and sorry. So Aruna founded Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan, which is a laborer farmers organization working in rural Rajasthan, and they have done amazing work in terms of implementing and in fact lobbying for Right to Information Act, then NREGA, which is National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, so various other, and now they're involved in Whistleblowers Protection Act as well.
So this is a grassroots organization. They created a social movement to pass a Right to Information Act in India. It's one of the best in the world, way better than what we have here in the US. There's no comparison. So you see the difference between when citizens get involved in drafting, in conceptualizing legislation versus people at the top who may have good intentions, but they may not be thinking, well, how can this legislation empower citizens? How can citizens use this legislation? So that was a major victory for this movement. But what she says, you read what she says. So she says, I define corruption by what it denies people. It's about, corruption is defined about how it oppresses people. And that's another way to look at corruption. This is the bottom-up way to look at corruption. So it's not corruption as the transaction, the corrupt transactions. It's about corruption, how it hurts people in their everyday lives. So I'm going to go through this quickly. I think we all know about what is impunity. But corruption goes along with impunity. And I love this definition because it was something that was defined to me by an activist and one of the founders of a movement in Mexico called DHP. And Alejandro, could you pronounce that properly?
Dejemos de hacernos pendejos.
Okay. Whoa! Yes, yes. The Spanish speakers know what that means. There's a bad word in there. The nice translation is quit playing dumb, or let's quit playing dumb, or let's, but there's a badder version of it. But that's the message of it. So this is her definition of it, and I will say it because this is being recorded. Impunity is no consequences, no accountability, no punishment for wrongdoing. And that goes hand in hand with corruption. Well, what's the opposite of that? What's something positive? What do we want to accomplish when we fight corruption, when we impact corruption? Yay! Yes! He did not see the PowerPoint, I assure you. So this is a great definition from Transparency International, the concept that individuals, agencies, and organizations are held responsible for carrying out their powers properly. So I'm moving along because time is passing, but these are things to think about. We want to fight something negative, but we want to achieve something positive. We want to get the rights, we want to get the services, we want to get the things that the citizens are being deprived of. So we're not just trying to fight the corruption, we're trying to achieve something positive. That is what fighting corruption is about. So that's the book, you saw it moving along. So the book and this presentation is based on research that I did for many years, more years than I ever imagined would be possible. And I found more cases than I ever imagined I would find. I knew that I would find cases. I suspected it. But I found about 30, and there are new cases coming up all the time. So for example, in Cambodia, the land grabbing, which you'll hear about from one of your colleagues, that involves a lot of corruption. The corruption is enabling a lot of the land grabbing. That's just one example. In the US, we have a movement that is a nascent movement that is starting to grow about political corruption. Has anyone heard of 99 Rise? Yes, Amber, yeah. Well, if you just Google, Aaron, 99rise.org, look them up. They're really cool. So we have things sprouting up around the world. So I'm not going to, you see all the different countries. So basically, as you can see, these citizens in organized campaigns and movements, wielding people power, engaging in what we would call in our FSI civil resistance, are impacting corruption in really different places all over the world. So I've got a few clips from some of the cases to give you a flavor of what it means when citizens fight corruption and what these different kinds of campaigns look like. So I tried to line them all up. So let's see if I can do this properly now. Here we go. This is a 3-minute clip from a film which unfortunately is no longer available on the internet. It's from Egypt, Shafin Com.
They are going to constitute the parliament. كنت بشتغل في التلفزيون المصري. يوميها الظهر رحت لجنتي الانتخابية وتقريبا كانت بتمش. وبالليل رحت مبنى الإذاعة والتلفزيون. قعدت قدام الكاميرات وقلت للناس إن اللجان الانتخابية شهدت إقبالا غير مسبوق. ومن ضمنهم كانت لجنتي.
رسالة للشعب كله بنقول ايه عندكم يعني هم دول صوتكم اللي انتوا بتقولوا صوتكم الحر اهو بالجزمة بالجزمة
معليش البلد تستحمل اكتر من كده.
التواجد الامني اللي بره ده ما بيخوفنيش. ابقى كدابه لو قلت لكم ان هو ما بيخوفنيش، ولكن اللي احنا واقفين عشانه اهم كتير من اي وقت.
I saw a judge change the results when he said, which to me is wrong, when he said, you go out and I throw you in jail. The majority of the people in this country are extremely poor.
والله العظيم ثلاثة عايشين عيش في بلاد ومحدش سأل فيها.
Over the past 2 years, I have seen so much of it. I can no longer turn my eye to it.
So if you want to read more, it's in the book. Okay. Italy. I know that I think Hardy spoke to you a little bit about Addio Pizzo in Italy. This is the nonviolent youth resistance movement in the city of Palermo in Sicily that is fighting the mafia. I'm going to show you a couple minutes from a film about them so you get a sense of what how this movement started and what they did at the very beginning, which was really creative and low risk and unusual in their context. And I say in their context because creative, low risk, unusual, all these things are all context specific. What is low risk in one context may not be in another context. What will work in one context will not in another. But what transcends everything is finding things that people will do, things that are low risk, and often, as you will see, doing things that are part of everyday life and turning everyday actions into an act of resistance.
Del commercio equestoriale. Al momento di quasi realizzarlo, stavamo quasi per pagare l'affitto del locale. Il nostro amico ci ha fatto una consulenza dal punto di vista proprio economico. Aveva messo tra i costi che avremmo dovuto sostenere la probabilità di pagare il pizzo.
Pizzo is extortion money.
Sheila and Raffaele Genova are part of the generation tiring of mafia control. They knew the people in Palermo were paying the pizzo, but when it got in the way of opening their pub, they wondered why they should put up with it.
Ce la raccontavamo che vivevamo in una città normale dove potevamo fare delle cose da cittadini liberi, e così non era.
Laura and Raffaele say Sicily offers few economic prospects to their generation. It's the mafia, they think, that's keeping the region underdeveloped. Few will invest. That's why they decided to put up the anti-pizzo leaflets.
Il nostro appunto deve essere un richiamo alle armi, una chiamata alle attenzioni. Almeno all'inizio non pensavamo di riuscirci, ma volevamo semplicemente cercare di aprire il dibattito.
The media attention to their stunt made them nervous, afraid of becoming mafia targets themselves. The only way to be safe, they felt, was to get more people involved.
Siamo andati una domenica allo stadio, abbiamo fatto uno striscione noi.
Quindi contro il pizzo. E sotto l'indirizzo del sito che avevamo allora. E là Giorgio
si è guardato in televisione,
ha visto questa cosa in televisione e ci ha contattato.
Giorgio was the first shop owner to join the movement at Dio Pizzo, or Goodbye Pizzo. The idea was to build a coalition of mafia-free businesses, like free trade coffee or organic produce. They launched a pizza-free brand.
È un fatto poi pratico. Sono riusciti a mettere insieme gruppi di commercianti e imprenditori, pubblicando anche l'elenco di queste attività, dove si invita la cittadinanza ad acquistare in questi posti, perché sono quelli che si dicono no al pizzo, no al rugby.
Perché il pizzo non droga, piuttosto che armi, piuttosto che malaffare, perché ci siamo resi conto subito che era probabilmente la strada attraverso la quale di fatto si creava un consenso, una cultura e un controllo del territorio, senza la quale probabilmente tutta una serie di affari successivi venivano meno.
One by one, the Adio Pizzo kids signed up businesses. In less than 2 years, the movement began to pick up steam.
Ma non siamo più i 7 dell'anno precedente, ci presentiamo come 3.500 consumatori, cittadini per la legalità.
The Adio Pizzo kids decided to make a show of force. They declared a pizza-free day for the entire city.
So the interesting thing about this is you see that what they did was, in our analysis that we've had in the past couple of days, they identified that pizzo was a pillar of support, you could say, for the mafia. And they wanted to weaken that critical pillar of support because, as they said, then other things would start to crumble. And so that's why they decided to attack pizzo. And so again, you also see this notion that Erica was talking about of unity and high participation. They didn't say we will have one business that will stop paying pizzo. They said we need to get many businesses. And so they started with one, but then that grew and grew and grew, and now there are over 1,000 businesses in Palermo that publicly refuse to pay extortion money to the mafia. So again, it's this power of numbers. And then they united the citizenry with the businesses. So they've done all kinds of what we would call nonviolent tactics to get citizens to engage in actions to support the businesses that are refusing to pay pizzo. There's a chapter in the book. I'm going to move along. Russia is not in the book. It's in something else that came out recently. But I'm going to play you a clip from the movement to defend Khimki forest in Russia. This has to do with, it has to do with the environment, preserving an old growth forest outside of Moscow. And corruption is integral in this abuse that's going on. And I can tell you later a little bit more about what's going on now. And by the way, Evgenia Kirikova, the leader, founder of this movement, was here last year.
Why isn't it moving? Uh-oh.
Shaazka, can you move the mouse to this? There we go. It's good. Never mind.
When my husband and I first married, we wanted to find the prettiest, greenest place to raise our family. We were tired of Moscow, so we moved to be near the Khimki forest. One day we were in the oak grove and noticed that a lot of trees had red markers on them, indicating they would be cut down. We were shocked.
Evgenia discovered that Khimki forest would be destroyed because Prime Minister Putin revoked the federal protection for it to build the Moscow-St. Petersburg highway. With deep ties to Putin, French construction giant Beyerle became the lead in the $8 billion project.
We found out that a French company secretly planned to use our tax money to build a road. The profits would go into the pockets of Putin's cronies. We knew we had to fight back corruption, particularly because there were better routes for the highway that would save this beautiful forest.
Without any prior experience in grassroots organizing, Evgenia left her engineering practice and formed the group Defend Khimki Forest.
We tried every possible way to protect Khimki. We buried the president in our petitions and organized demonstrations and concerts. When they started clear-cutting without permits, we took our protests into the forest and created a camp to stop the construction.
The activists threw themselves in front of bulldozers, suffering beatings and arrests in the process. The stakes were raised when a number of journalists covering the story were attacked and nearly killed.
They've died since then.
Then, in one of the largest environmental protests in Russian history, Evgenia and her allies brought together a crowd of 5,000 in Moscow's Pushkin Square. In response, President Medvedev ordered a public inquiry into the highway's environmental impacts.
С учетом такого, after considering the appeals, I'm ordering the government to halt construction of this road.
Признание неправоты – это настолько редкое.
Admission of injustice is such a rare move on the part of our government that even only temporarily admitting they are wrong is quite significant.
6 months later, construction resumed. The standoff in the forest continued. The Defend Khimki movement helped spark a broader political uprising, when tens of thousands of people took to the streets of Moscow protesting corrupt parliamentary elections. The campaign to save a forest became the new face of Russian civil society.
We all live in Khimki forest has become our rallying cry. We shared in the realization that common people must come together to defend their rights, and we must never give up.
For outstanding environmental achievement in Europe,
Okay, so that gives you an idea of the range of campaigns and movements that are going on around the world. I have more to show you, but I'm moving along. I'd like to give you an idea of what kinds of nonviolent tactics citizens carry out in movements that target corruption in one way or another. So some of them are ones that you're familiar with, but others are very different from things that people think of as, you know, traditional or classical nonviolent actions. So there are things like gathering information. Who would have thought that that's a nonviolent tactic? using right to information procedures, as is done in India with the Fifth Pillar movement, monitoring governments, monitoring spending, monitoring budgets, monitoring construction, monitoring poverty programs, monitoring all kinds of things. So I want to show you what, for one example of what monitoring looks like. This comes from Afghanistan, and these are called community monitoring initiatives. These are volunteer-driven. They are enabled and supported by a CSO called Integrity Watch Afghanistan. So let's take a look. And I have it here. And you know, oh, that's so weird. It's still trying to load it. Okay. Okay, good.
این سرک نمین است. در این پروژه به شکل مثال میتوان دریافت مردم چه اندازه خود را در اتباع نظارت از شیوه مصرف کمک‌ها مسئول می‌دانند. این سرک بر طول 13.3 کیلومتر و عرض 4 متر به شرکت ساختمانی به قرارداد داده شده است و بیشتر قسمت‌های سرک کمتر از 3 متر کار شده. در رابطه خواستیم نظر انجینر شرکت تطبیق کننده را نیز داشته باشیم.
خب ببینید تا یه قسمت سرک خلاص شده، لوله‌ای ریخته شده. یه ایده 14 میلی که بیشتر نگفت یه ایده 14 میلی ریخته میشه، یه ایده 10 میلی ریخته میشه. تمام میگی. این قسمت تا کجا بگیرید؟ تا اگه تا اینجا اگه ما بگیریم بیشتر تا اینجا همین کاری کمیه خوبه این دیگه. سمت اینجا خود این دیگه شعبه دوازی هم نیه 2.6 سرک اینجا 3 متر اگه داره بود 4 متر کار بشه خب باید سرک تا اینجا کار بشه.
So you get the idea. I don't know if you noticed when they were having their meeting at the beginning, they said, it's up to us to do something. We need to do it. It's our right to do it. It's our right to ask. When they were talking to the contractors, they said, don't interfere. They said, no, this is our right. This is what happens. People who are marginalized, who are excluded, whose concerns are not taken into account by those who are doing things on their behalf, are transforming. They are realizing that they have the right to ask, they have the right to challenge, and that it's up to them to do something, that they can't just wait for somebody else to do it for them. So it involves these intangibles, and that's so important in nonviolent movements and campaigns, intangibles, collective responsibility to do something, collective identity. Maybe you heard this term already. It was something coined by Lee Smithy, a sociologist. Collective identity is what he calls a sense of we-ness, us. It's all up to us to do something. So that comes out so clearly in this. People start feeling that they have dignity, that they have the capacity to say something. It's so important. And once people start feeling this, because they're doing something and they can see some impact, that's really transformational for a society, especially if it happens more and more and more widely in a society. So I'm going to show you now a clip, let's see, in a second. So here are some other types of tactics. I'm not going to go through all of them, but are any of you familiar with the defining method of social audits? Social audits, a couple of you are. So have you heard of the term defining method in our FSI thus far? Defining method is something that another sociologist, Kurt Schock, talks about. It is a nonviolent tactic around which other nonviolent tactics revolve. So together they create what's called the defining method. So for example, in Afghanistan, the community monitoring initiatives, you saw them measuring the road. That's one tactic, but that was the monitoring. But there were so many other nonviolent activities going on around that monitoring. So it's not just that people say, okay, we want to fight corruption or we want to get our road built, so let's just go out and measure the road. That's not how it happens. That tactic is embedded in many other tactics. It's there's strategic organizing and strategic planning and strategic analysis that goes on. So it's really important to remember when we see these tactics that one tactic alone is not going to achieve change. It's that tactic together with others, either sequentially or in a defining method, which have the potential to bring forth change. So let's look at social audits. All of this is in the book, but that's a 6-step defining method. And I won't go into the steps, but I'm going to show you a piece of that, which is something that originated from MKSS in India, from the Right to Information movement. And these are Face the People forums between citizens and the information they collect and power holders. And that has basically traveled across the world all the way to Kenya. And so you have activists from India who went and met with activists in Kenya and shared with them their experiences. So I'm going to just show you the clip so you get a sense of what a Face the People forum looks like. Okay, so that gives you a sense of what's going on. Now, MUHURI stands for Muslims for Human Rights. They're based in Mombasa, Kenya. And right now, they and another organization, Haki Africa, are under attack by the Kenyan government. And I know this is being recorded and will be on YouTube, so I hope that this is heard. They have been put on a terrorist list. And it's outrageous. And major international organizations are fighting this. There are countries that are fighting this because it's really outrageous of how they are being attacked. But they are getting solidarity. They know that they're innocent. They're providing all the documentation. They have able lawyers that are fighting this in court. But what happens in the meantime, they will prove that they're innocent. But in the meantime, what this does to their day-to-day operations is basically it makes their day-to-day operations very difficult. So this is an example of repression, and I know you've covered repression, but I know that they're going to succeed in proving their innocence, and this points to a lesson that when you fight corruption, you are doing what? If we think of our definition, you are starting to impact that system of benefits, all those within the corrupt system that are benefiting from it and that have vested interests. And you are also exposing wrongdoing, and you are trying to challenge impunity of power holders, and thus they will react and they will fight back. That's the reality of fighting corruption. But people don't stop. This is the amazing thing. People are so courageous and amazing that they don't stop. So I'm going to move along because I'm watching the time, and that clock is really in a good location because I can like keep an eye on it. So I'm going to show you a low-risk mass action. This is from Turkey, from the 1997 campaign called 1 Minute of Darkness for Constant Light in the book. But imagine you're living in a country that's a semi-democracy. Every time people go out on the street and protest, they get beaten and jailed. What are you going to do? What are the options? You're dealing with impunity, you're dealing with corruption, you're dealing with links between organized crime, paramilitary groups, and the government and the private sector, and the media. How are you going to tackle that? Well, I'm going to show you something very interesting. This is a tactic that was part of other tactics in this campaign.
Büyük bir rastlantı eseri de benim yöneticisi olduğum ajanslı konkuru kazandı. Ve orada denilen şuydu. Susurluk olayından sonra, kamyondan sonra artık Türkiye'de hiçbir şey eskisi gibi olmayacak. Dolayısıyla bütün toplum üstüne düşen görevi yapmalıdır, aktarmalıdır, temizlenmelidir, kendisini arındırmalıdır gibi bir çağrısı vardı medyanın. Bizim Şubat eylemimiz bu çağrının bir süre sonrasına yoğun bir şekilde de desteklediler.
Eylemin başarısını sağlayan yurttaşların evlerimizde, kendi mekanlarında ışıklarını yakıp söndürerek yapmaları biçiminde.
Do you want some help?
Yeah, I don't see the volume on there, so I don't know if there's another way.
Do it like this. This is the volume. Oh. So let's move it back there.
We can just keep it there.
Maximize. You want to keep it there?
Çıtanın çok aşağıda tutulduğu bir eylem olmasıydı. Biz sokaklara çıkacağını bir coşku öylesine yüksekti ki insanlar sokaklara indiler, kendi sokaklarında ellerinde mumlarla, çiçeklerle, hoplayarak, zıplayarak, şarkı söyleyerek eylem yaptılar.
Çok farklı görüşler, Türkiye'de hiçbir zaman yan yana gelemeyecek kesimler, farklı sosyal tabakalar, işte Sabancı'nın ikiz kuleleriyle varoşlardaki gecekondular aynı anda yapıp söndürdü. Her yaştan insanın katıldığı bir eylem oldu.
Şu dersi çıkarabiliriz. Bir, bu eylem çok önemli toplumsal bir ihtiyacı karşılamak için planlanabilir. Yani herhangi bir gündelik bir şey için planlanabilir bir şey değil. İkincisi, çok yalın ve basit diyebileceğiniz bir katılım biçimi vardır. Ama bütün evlerin çoğunluğunun katılmasını gerektiren bir şeydir. Dolayısıyla gene insanların yaşamsal bir ihtiyacının karşısında çıkabilir ortaya. Önem vermemiz gereken bir şey de şu. Eğer biz en haklı olduğumuz davada bile sesimiz...
Okay. So what was this low-risk mass action? They decided at 9 o'clock every night, people would turn off their lights for 1 minute. 1 minute of darkness for constant light. This was created by a group of citizens, some lawyers, some PR people, some scholars, and some others, a small group. And they said, we want to do something simple. And the teenage daughter of one of the lawyers came up with the idea to turn off lights. So people started doing it. The campaign lasted 6 weeks. They estimated that 20 million people participated. So after about 2 weeks, people started losing their fear because they were doing this, turning off the lights, but then they wanted to do something else. So people then just went out into their neighborhoods. They didn't organize demonstrations, but they just went outside and they just gathered together and they did fun things. They danced. People played, played music. Some people then held vigils. They would just stand together and hold candles. So they started doing things, and slowly the fear started to dissipate and dissipate. So this was a very interesting thing, that they found something easy, simple, and low risk in their context. And that was a way for people around the country to start wielding collective power and pressure on their government for very specific demands. Not anything like, no, we don't want this connection between organized crime elements and the government. No, they had very, very specific demands for judicial inquiries, protection for judges, very interesting things. You see the hand of the lawyers in the group. So it was really, it had some very interesting impacts and outcomes. So you'll hear about it in the book. I'm going to move on because I'm watching the clock. So here's something. Has anyone ever heard of an anti-corruption pledge? This comes from India, from the Fifth Pillar movement in the state of Tamil Nadu. So they have many activities, and one of them is this. They call it their nonviolent weapon against corruption. You can't, this is a weapon. I'm going to pass it around. This is the 0 rupee note. If you're asked for a bribe, you give this. And you think, that's going to work? Well, they have so many success stories, but what they did was really strategic. This is not me. If this is a corrupt individual, though we know he's not. I am. If I give it to him, it's not just me, little old Shaazka. It's me and the Fifth Pillar movement is standing behind me. So if something happens to me, I have this movement behind me to support me. And that's why it's powerful. So I'm going to pass this around, and everybody can take a look. And I forgot to pass around the other. This is a nonviolent weapon from Italy. So this is old. This is from when I was interviewing the leaders of the movement. But it's the list of businesses that publicly refuse to pay extortion money. You can get this on the internet. You can get it in all different ways. But this is a weapon, because this list represents a defining method of this movement, and it's a way for me as a consumer to resist the mafia. Because if I want to find a painter, a graphic designer, if I want to go to a restaurant or a pension to go visit somebody, I just can look it up or look it up on the internet. They probably have an app now. They even have their own version of a credit card now, so you can like put money into it and then go use it in mafia-free places. So they're like really clever. So I'm going to pass this around too. You can take a look at that weapon, nonviolent weapon. And here, let's take a look. So Fifth Pillar India, another element of what they do is working with youth. So they have really, for me, encapsulated how to deal with a dilemma that many movements face when they're trying to impact corruption in their society. Because people say, how are we going to tackle corruption? It's endemic. It's everywhere. It's embedded. It's a habit. It's this, it's that. How are we going to change it? So what they did, and what other movements do, is they say they focus on something in the short run, and then they focus on an objective or goals in the long run. So in the short run, they want to help people stop having to pay bribes. And this especially affects poor people. Middle class people can afford bribes and sometimes will willingly pay the bribes to make their lives easier. But poor people can't, and they suffer from it. And people can die sometimes if they don't have money to pay bribes. So they said, we want to empower people now, in the present. But that's not enough. We can't transform India just by doing that. How are we going to transform India? Well, we can't transform this generation. They're not going to change. They're cynical. They've got their patterns of corruption. They've got their vested interests. What can we do? We have to focus on the next generation. So we have to focus on youth now, so that in the next 10 to 15 years, we can see a broader transformation in the society. So they do all kinds of nonviolent activities with youth. So I'm going to show you a pledge that they do, working with students in universities. Now they're speaking in Tamil, so I don't think too many of you will understand the Tamil, so I'm going to just close that up. So that's an example. Okay, so this gives you an idea. Oops.
Hey, Jim, you know the old sugar daddy. Hey, Jim, you know the old sugar daddy.
Whoa. That's on another slide in a couple minutes.
Is that it? That's part of the presentation?
It is, yeah. So, moving along. What? You want that case? Okay, so moving along. This gives you an example of the range of things that people do. Do you see this glass? What would happen if you drank tea out of that glass and that was an act of resistance? What? So imagine if you're living in a really repressive regime. And this was Egypt during Mubarak, and unfortunately it's becoming Egypt under Sisi. But the Shayfin-Com women-led movement came up with this brilliant idea. Let's get 250,000 glasses with our logo that says we're watching you and give them out to tea shops all over Egypt. And let's make 150,000 reusable shopping bags and give them out to women all over Egypt. So when they go to the market to buy their food, they're carrying a Shayfin-Com shopping bag. Carrying that is an act of resistance. It creates a dilemma. It's a dilemma action. Did you cover dilemma actions? What are the police going to do? Arrest a lady who's going to buy some food at the market for holding this bag? Or arrest people for drinking tea? Kind of difficult in that context. Maybe not in others, but in that context. So that is a way that you have, what? 250 and 150, that's what? 400,000 people around the country engaging in an act of resistance, multiple occasions. How about that? That's one tactic. So that's not going to change corruption in Egypt, but it is part of a movement. And it's a very creative, low-risk mass action tactic. Okay, moving along, because we have to move along. Okay, I'm going to show you one more little video. So up here, this is very important. You see this meeting. This is part of Iowa's community monitoring initiatives. And a tactic, there is a nonviolent tactic we could call engagement with power holders. That's a tactic. It's not just disruption, disruption, disruption. We need to disrupt, disrupt, disrupt. But we also sometimes strategically need to engage, engage, engage. And so this was something that was invented where Iowa, Integrity Watch Afghanistan, created these forums which are now being replicated all over Afghanistan, where the local community monitors, volunteers from these efforts, come together with the contractors, with the aid agencies, with the media present, the local media, with the relevant officials at the local level on a monthly basis, and they present their findings. Wow, that's amazing. First, they're engaging. They're building relationships. These people who nobody cared about before, that were marginalized and excluded, are now sitting at a table and being treated as equals with people of authority whom they never could have dreamed of interacting with before. That's revolutionary. And there are outcomes from these meetings because the people listen to them. And they are representing their whole community. So it's not one person, it's the whole community who's behind them in a way. So that's a very, again, an innovative engagement tactic in that context. So training, I'm just going to show you a clip again from Muhuri in Kenya. This is going to take just I'm just going to show you 2 minutes, but I think it's important to think again that some tactics, some activities that we engage in movements, in campaigns, we may not think of as important or as nonviolent tactics, but they are. And education and training is essential, is really important, especially if we're trying to organize a nonviolent action, or if we're trying to mobilize our community, or if we're trying to impact some sort of corruption and impunity. We need to be informed. People have to understand what they want to do. If they want to monitor, they're not just going to say, okay, let's go all monitor. What are we going to do? What are we going to measure? You have to learn how to do that. You have to learn how to read a budget. You have to learn how to read maybe like an architectural plan. People in slums learn these things. Sometimes people say, well, how, we have low literacy in our society, we have this and that. How can people do this? You better believe it, they can do it. And they can do it without all the education that some of us are privileged to have. So I'm going to show you an example of training. Just 2 minutes, and then we got to really move along. That was a really short one. Now, this movie is available on YouTube, and it was also provided to you as a resource in one of your emails, so you can watch this online. And I know you're dying to see this one, so we're gonna move along now. So, 5 takeaways. I'm gonna do this really fast. I think the first takeaway is obvious. Citizens in organized grassroots movements, campaigns, and community initiatives can achieve outcomes. There's no question about it. And that is like the positive outcome. It's what makes me such an optimist when it comes to corruption. I won't go through all of this, but you get a sense of the kinds of things, the kinds of accomplishments that people have gotten, have achieved. Second one. This is probably you gathered this from the examples. People power targeting corruption is manifested frequently in societies enduring poor governance, low levels of literacy, and severe repression. And that repression can be perpetrated by the state, but also paramilitary groups or organized crime. Now, does that sort of, I know this has sort of been the theme, that people who are oppressed have the capacity to change their situations. This is what FSI is about. But when we look at the way that people think in the development world, the way that people think people who are working at the international level about fighting targeting violent conflict, trying to bring an end to violent conflict, trying to build state building, democracy development, anti-poverty. This notion is radical for them, because we have these misconceptions in these worlds that you need to have this. It's challenging. What is the conventional wisdom? The conventional wisdom is not reflecting the reality. People are doing this in places where they don't have the benefits of stable governments, of high literacy, of accountability mechanisms in their governments, of functioning independent judiciaries. And in fact, I found that this was kind of interesting. It was very difficult. I had a hard time finding cases in Western Europe or North America. I found the case in Mexico, but at the time I couldn't find any cases in the US. I mean, maybe there were and I didn't find them, but I was finding them in all the tough places. And I think that speaks volumes to the power that people have. And finally, and this is very interesting, many of these campaigns were not called anti-corruption campaigns. And that's why I think a lot of times we don't hear about them. Because they're basically efforts on the part of citizens and civil society to get together and impact some kind of an injustice. The denial of the right, a medicine, a wage, what Aruna Roy was talking about. So they don't go out and say we're anti-corruption campaigns, because that's really not what they're about. They're about fighting the poverty or fighting the fact that they can't, that the children are not getting a proper education. So that's what they're about. But in order to address that, they're tackling corruption. Otherwise, they cannot bring about the change that they want or have an impact. So I'm going to play this video. This is the one you wanted to see. But by the way, this is very interesting. I don't have a sample of this. I wish I did. But isn't it interesting that in a different part of the world, somebody else has taken the notion of currency and come up with a way to take this notion of currency and put a message on it. So this currency was developed, these campaigns were developed by an alliance of civil society organizations in southern Africa. It's called ARASA. And so what they did with this currency in South Africa, for example, you can get this currency in your own in your own country. So there's a South African version, then there's like the Swazi version and different versions. Pardon me. So what they would do is they would go around to communities with a pickup truck. They would meet people, you know, when somebody comes in from the outside to a poor community and actually treats them with respect and wants to listen to them, that's really amazing. People love it because they don't get that very often. They're just struggling and nobody really cares about them. So they would go out into communities, they would hand out these currencies, and then they would show the video. Okay. And they would set this up on the back of the pickup truck. They would have like a little screen, and they would show this, and then they would have a meeting with the citizens in the community. Oh man, is that ever loud? Okay. Okay.
Hey, Jill.
You see, I had trouble opening it at the beginning. So is it that one video could have taken me an hour to talk about, right? But it was all in that video, and it was deadly serious, literally, but it was also funny. So it's a really brilliant example of how you convey information, and you do it in a way that's accessible to people. But you can tackle a really serious subject, but that humor is also really important in nonviolent struggle. And I found that over and over again in these campaigns that were targeting corruption. So I'm going to move along. But I think that another takeaway that's really important is that maybe this is a little different from when we have a nonviolent movement against, for example, an authoritarian regime. In these types of efforts, the objective is often is basically to, overall, the long-term objective is to change a system of corruption. Now that system may be linked up to a particular ruler, but overall it's more than that. Because you can get rid of a ruler, but you still have the system of corruption there. And that's the problem. So you have one success, but then you have the next chapter of the struggle, which is transforming the corrupt system, which will find a way to sort of reinvent itself and keep going along in the new situation. So what's really important is to think about who on the inside, within the state or within institutions, within non-state sectors, are champions of integrity and honesty and are trying to change corruption, are trying to impact corruption. And how do we, as citizens in movements and campaigns, how do we empower them to do what they want to do, what they're trying to do? If we think about the system of corruption, they're in that system. They're surrounded by corrupt relationships and vested interests, and they're trying to change it. They're outnumbered. They're outnumbered. So they themselves, on their own, are having difficulties within the system. Even if they have a power and authority in a government, they themselves are facing so many corrupt vested interests. They need the help from citizens. So they can also help. So they can empower and protect them by pursuing accountability, by pursuing reform and change, by making demands. And then those integrity champions within the system can say, look, the people are asking for this. That gives them power to do what they're doing. And they can also do something else which is interesting. They can allow people within the system to say no to corruption. The Gandhian notion of non-cooperation, probably, I think you've talked about that already, non-cooperation, right? Disobedience. But if you're just an official and you're not trying to reform the system, but you're just an official caught in that system, you too are facing all the corrupt interests. You don't want to be the person out there to be the target, but you just want in your daily work to not be corrupt. Again, citizen movements and campaigns can empower you. So for example, with the 0 rupee currency. In India, this was a very interesting thing that happened. There was an official in one office who got a hold of the 0 rupee currency, and he taped it on his desk. So the message was, when people come to him, he doesn't want them to offer him bribes. So by having the 0 rupee taped to his desk, they got the message, this person doesn't want a bribe. I'm not going to offer him a bribe. So that's a way that movements can empower those to say no, to not cooperate with the system of corruption. And it creates political will. I think lots of you have heard, we hear people, we think to ourselves, oh, if only there was political will in our country to fight corruption. Well, even if you have a prime minister or a mayor in a municipality who's elected and genuinely are honest and want to fight corruption, again, they're alone. They do have authority, but how are they going to fight all the corrupt vested interests in their country? So it was interesting to me, the new prime minister of Nepal last year, he said something, I read some newspaper interviews with him. He said, I can't fight corruption by myself. I need the citizens to help me fight corruption. So he understood that. Well, I think he understood that dynamic. Suman will know if he does. And it contributes to changing behaviors and practices and general norms. Over time, that's what we want to do. We want to disrupt the system in the short term, and we want to transform the system in the long term by changing all these behaviors and practices and norms. And finally, and this is really important, top-down and bottom-up are complementary. We need both. There's a synergy between them. And this this challenges an assumption that we have in the world, that once you put anti-corruption structures in place, illicit practices will change. We hear this. You have like development actors and donors with very good intentions that will say, well, this country has come out of a war, so they need an anti-corruption commission, and they need this freedom of information law, and they need this public disclosure law, and they have a list, which is all very true. I mean, it's really good to have these things. You need them. But Does that mean that there's change just because those things exist on the books, or just because there's an address for an anti-corruption commission? What if that commission has no power? What if the people who are appointed and they themselves are corrupt? So just because you have these in place doesn't mean things will naturally change. So that's why we need extra institutional pressure. And that's what comes from grassroots campaigns and movements that are trying to target corruption. And this is a strategic advantage. It goes, I borrowed this notion from Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stephan's book when they say the strategic logic of nonviolent conflict. There's a strategic advantage of the involvement, the active involvement of citizens wielding people power to impact corruption, because they bring that extra institutional pressure to change. That without that pressure, it's very hard for things to change by themselves on the inside. So we have, I lost 15 minutes of my session in the beginning, but I know I can't get them back.
Why not?
I can?
I mean, I'm not the judge, but I think they're the judge. If we've learned anything, it's that really, it's in their consent.
Okay, so we started actually at 9:15. So I want to ask you, I'd like to open this up to some discussion and see how we go for 15 minutes. And if we want to continue the discussion, we can continue. Or if you want to do a quick exercise just for fun, you can do that for 15 minutes. Does that sound like a plan? Yeah? Okay. So what I'd like to do in the beginning is actually we have a few people here in the room who themselves are actively engaged in fighting corruption. So I wanted to ask if one or two might be interested, very briefly, to just share a little bit about their experiences and how they see that, how they see the potential, or how they see in practice how people power is impacting corruption in their efforts. So I saw, okay, whoa, okay. Okay, I have 5 people. Okay, so